Hey guys, welcome to the Neglected Podcast. This podcast is not to change your mind, but to invite you into somebody else's narrative. This is a podcast to give a voice to the neglected. It is also an opportunity for all of us to engage.
All right, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Neglected Podcast. My name is Nick Schultz. You can hit me up at Schultzy Time. We're for the neglected. We got our producer Quinn over there. What's up, Quinn? Thanks for being here. And we've got the man, the myth, the legend, Corey Williams. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
Doing good, man. Glad to be here.
So we got connected last spring. We were on a Zoom call together with Theo, who was our second interview for the podcast and the voice of the neglected. He intros all of our podcast interviews, and we were on there talking about race and some of the things that were going on that were really difficult at the time and still now that are going on. And so we connected there, got to be social media friends. Now we're close to being real life friends in person here. So I appreciate you being here, man.
Thank you for having me. And hopefully after this, we'll be blood brothers.
Hey, if you accept me, I will take that gift. So I appreciate it.
Let's do it.
All right, man. Well, let's start with little Corey, man. Where did you grow up? What was your family background and dynamic like? And paint us that picture of what life was like for you.
Yeah. So I'm originally from Jacksonville, Florida. I have what I believe is an interesting upbringing. Was literally raised in a house with about 15 of us, my grandmother, grandfather, my mom, sisters and brothers, which was 4 of us. And then I had cousins and aunts, about 15 to 16 of us in a 3-bedroom house. Pretty big house, but 3 bedrooms. So you figure out, the dynamics of where we slept at, and how we slept. Yeah. Drugs, abuse, poverty. I remember moments where my siblings physically fought my mother. I remember instances where my mother and aunts physically fought my grandmother. So again, I come from an interesting upbringing. I remember times where the biggest drug dealer or one of the biggest drug dealers in Jacksonville came to our home, and because one of my uncles, he was heavy into selling drugs, and I guess something went wrong, and he came to the house to get him, and my grandmother came to the door with her gun, threatened him. And so very interesting background. I stuttered till I was about 21 years old. I couldn't speak. This conversation here would definitely not happen. Every now and then that stuttering steps back in. But at one point I almost left Jacksonville. When I actually left Jacksonville, when I saw myself about to go down a path of no return. Mm-hmm. And I reached out to my dad, who was at that time living in Miami, and asked him, could I move there? Because at that point I just saw myself, my grades were going down. My family, my mom didn't care about my grades. And I said to myself, Corey, if you don't make a change, you're going to find yourself just like your sisters and your brothers, who was more so not the quiet type. I was the quiet type. I was introverted, and I think that had a lot to do with the mere fact that I stuttered. So I couldn't talk, I couldn't engage. And so I also believe that my stutter was a guardrail for me as well. And so ultimately I reached out to him. He said, yes, I could move in a matter of maybe a week. I left Jacksonville, moved to Miami. My grandmother, my grandfather there on my dad's side, they got me back in order on the narrow path, and just got myself together. But grades got up. They did not allow me to do a lot of things I was able to get away with in Jacksonville. And so finished high school in May 96, moved back to Jacksonville in June of 96. At that time, got my girlfriend, my first girlfriend. I lost my virginity my last year in high school, got her pregnant. It's all now about 24 years ago. Got her pregnant, was on my way to Howard University, full scholarship, but that happened the last year of high school. So that forced me to move back to Jacksonville, only because she didn't want to move that way. And so we moved to Jacksonville. And I would say my son was born December 3rd of 96. I was invited to a church January of 97. It was a large mega church, a Southern Baptist church. And I remember when we put up to the church, I said, I won't come here again. I didn't know and once I got inside, like, this is too many people. I'll never come here again. Just being nice to the person who invited us. But that Sunday, the man had preached that word in such a way that I could not explain. And I found myself leaving the balcony, walking down the stairs of that church, and I gave my life to Christ in February of 97. And so you fast forward now to 2021, full-time ministry, pastored 2 churches, to do a lot of leadership coaching and teaching and developing, and just enjoying ministry right now. So
Well, yeah. Dang, man. Well, thanks for being a guest on the podcast and wrapping up that life story for us.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I Okay, I got a lot of questions.
It is a lot of questions within that for sure.
Oh, definitely. Well, let's just start back at the childhood first, and how did that make you? How did that make up your mindset of what you thought about the world, or what you thought about race, or drugs, or community, or the world in that specific environment you were in at your home, seeing all that stuff? Like, were you able to see a bigger picture that this isn't normal or shouldn't be this way, or like what was your mindset when you were younger, and how much did that like mess you up, you think?
Right. Well, when I was younger, I just thought it was just what it was. You know, it was everybody's life was that way. I wasn't exposed to too much outside of my neighborhood and community. For the most part, I went to different schools out of our community, so I did see things that way. But so far as shaping my angle, I would say no. I never. I was confident that my life wouldn't result to that. At least at the moment I did. And I'm sure at one moment I thought it didn't. Hence the reason why I decided to call my dad and say, hey, can I move to Miami?
So you never wanted any part of it.
Right.
You felt like you were going to be stuck in.
Right. I saw it because I began to go on a decline when in 9th grade, 10th grade, I was making straight Fs and no one said anything about it. I can skip school and something just clicked that you're about to go away that I'll never be able to return back from. And so I would have to say, now that you asked me the questions, some of the exposures that I did have at the other schools outside of my neighborhood did kind of expose me to, hey, watch what you're doing. Hey, there's a better life for you. Because even when I moved to Miami, the exposure I got from my grandmother on my dad's side and my aunts, they exposed me to different lifestyles and different things I could have and different things I can achieve if I went to school, if I finished this year, if I choose the right paths. So there's no doubt that world was shaping me. But as a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, as my wife would say, or my godmother would say, no one that age should have been making no one that age should have had to make the decision that, hey, I need to get out of this. Someone should have been doing that for me. But the good thing was something that was in me saying that, hey, you cannot stay in this. You have to make a decision for yourself as a teenager, as a young boy. You have to fend for yourself, if you would, on ensuring that the end of your life is not based on the way of your start of your life.
Right.
And so,
how exposed were you to the police, the criminal court justice system, or even like DFACS, foster care system? Were any of those kind of institutions part of your life or experience because of all the chaos that was happening in your house? Did you encounter any of those or your family?
No, I'm gonna say no on the quick end. On the short, on the long end, yes, the police came to our house, but it was always for justifiable reasons of, again, the drugs, with the uncles, who doing things they shouldn't do. But no, I've never encountered any police situation myself. I hear people telling the stories of, as they're driving, they got to put their hands up. That's not my story, and I think this comes from moving to Miami, being exposed to other parts of life, and having a confident grandmother, confident aunts and uncles in Miami who knew who they were, who felt that they had a right to this and that. So I've been pulled over by police officers, but I've never been in fear for my life. I never felt that I had to put my hands on the wheel. I never taught my son that either. I taught him just do right, treat people right. And so just some of that never shaped me. That doesn't take away, from people who had to do that. But my story did not equate to some of that. Yeah.
And in your story, you talk about having a son, and that you were going to Howard. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
And you had a full scholarship?
I had a full scholarship acceptance at Howard University for writing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool, man.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, what was it like for you? What was your mindset of what you thought a man or a father should be like? Because you went and lived with your dad, so he wasn't in your picture, and you have uncles and all these other men showing you a way that you knew you didn't want to be a part of. You're going to live with your dad, who you weren't with at first, but then you go. Then you're getting ready to get your life on track, and then you become a father. Sound like you weren't prepared to or wanting to do that. And where were you in that moment, in that build up to it of like, this is what a man is supposed to be and a father's supposed to be, and now,
Right.
oh crap,
Right.
I just did that, and my life is going to be a lot different because of it.
Well, just being authentically me. I try not to put on no one else's story and experience, and based on the way what they said is. But I have to say, I don't think I ever thought about what a man was supposed to be consciously until I had my son. I never thought of that. It just, I think it was just natural life that, a man, does this, a man does that. But stopping and to inform myself, I don't ever recall that. But that part probably stepped in for me when I realized that I had a son that was about to come forth, and I felt the obligations that came with that. At that point, I realized I couldn't go to Howard if I was going to invest my time and energy in him. So therefore, I made a decision as a man to go back home, back to Jacksonville, because at that point, her parents wanted her to have an abortion. She didn't want to have an abortion. So therefore, she literally ran away from home to Jacksonville. And that's what made me move back to Jacksonville. And so I would say having a son shaped me, forced me to study more on what a man, was supposed to be, and the expectations of a man, the expectations of a father. But if I can be just real honest, I think a lot of that just came by nature. It's just a natural instinct in me that I got to provide, I got to protect, I got to work, and so it wasn't a book. It was just the natural male instincts just kicked in. And yeah.
Did you feel like you had somebody you could look up to or ask or model that for you, or it's just like, I'm figuring this out as we go?
Just being authentically me, I just figured this out. Yeah, there was no reference books. I would probably say over the past 10 years, I do more of that. But the first 4 or 5 years of me having a son, no, it was just natural instincts. What I was exposed to probably that I did see, didn't realize I was duplicating. But it wasn't a process, like my wife does. She studies everything. She do research. She find examples and models. I didn't have that at the beginning. I do that, of course, now, right, but not at the beginning. It was just more so natural instincts.
Okay, so let's pick up the timeline where you don't go to Howard. You have a son. And what is kind of the series of events between that? Did you end up going to college somewhere? Did you just get a job? And when was that in line with having that church experience? What was the timeline with all that?
So I immediately enrolled in college that same summer of '96, a local college, FCCJ in Jacksonville. So I did enroll in college. I was probably dedicated to college for about a good year and a half, and then I ultimately dropped out of that. In February of '97, when I met Christ, is when I began to get more engaged into the studies of my Christian faith. I don't think I did not go to college because of the Christian faith. It was just the responsibilities of working and providing that forced me to kind of just rethink my schedule at the time. So school kind of fell off, and it made with us about 2 or 3 years, but it just fell away. And so working became my primary thing, and of course, church. I was a hard worker. I worked probably 50, 60 hours a week. I worked for AT&T that first 2 to 3 years, made good money. And so it was just the money. I feel like I don't need college right now. I'm making real good money. I'm making $50,000 right now, and I haven't been to college yet. I was a good salesperson. I could sell anything. And so AT&T, I made a lot of money the first 3 years of working for them. And so.
And that experience at that Southern Baptist church, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Was that it was a mega church? Was it a predominantly white church, or what was the makeup of that?
Well, it was a predominantly black church.
Was it? Okay.
It was probably at that time the only, at least what I was aware of, the only black Southern Baptist church in Jacksonville. It could have been more, but it was the only one I was aware of, and that was known in the city. Yeah. So I was Southern Baptist. That's so hard to believe that from February of '96 to about 2001, I was a part of that. Went to the Southern Baptist conventions almost every year, not through my church, but the First Baptist Church in Jacksonville. Where the big events would be at. I was involved in that.
Well, what was your concept of God? I'm just wondering, even growing up, were you exposed to church or faith in any way, even in the midst of all that stuff going on with your family? Was that ever a thing? And if it wasn't, did you wonder or just not care? And then all of a sudden you showed up there. Or was there like a gradual path that led you to that moment?
In Jacksonville, it wasn't a thing, and it definitely wasn't something that I wondered about. But when I did move to Miami, my grandmother would go to church on Sundays. And so by virtue of that, I did actually attend church a few times. And then actually has relatives, uncles who were in ministry that I had no clue about.
Really?
Yes. And ultimately moved back to Jacksonville. So when I was invited to attend church service, it wasn't a huge pushback. I'm like, sure, of course I go. But no church upbringing, Southern Baptist, a very teaching ministry. I think that's what drew me to it. It wasn't the name of the church at that point there. It was just a real Bible-based church. But ultimately I separated from that church because of some of the beliefs. The more I got into the word and began to question some of the things that I felt wasn't lining up with scripture-wise. And so hence I became more of a non-denominational type guy after realizing, okay, we are more bent towards this because of our Baptist angle or our Methodist angle or our charismatic angle or Pentecostal angle. And then you find out, okay, some of this stuff is not scripture, just our customs and our traditions and the way we were raised bends our view on leaning more towards the Southern Baptist or Pentecostal or missionary Baptist, versus what does the word say? What is the Spirit of God like outside of your custom and your traditions?
Did you think you were going to be a pastor and have your own church? Because you've mentioned stuttering.
Yeah.
Were you still kind of struggling with speech at that point, or when did a lot of things have to come together to be where you're at now? And when did that all of a sudden that hard to do that click? Because a lot of guys and females, men, whoever, like they'll use the word like calling. Like I at this moment, whether it was at this exact moment, but I just knew I was called to do this. I was called to preach or write or start a church. And did that happen, or was it a gradual thing for you?
Yeah, I would say gradual for me from the angle of when I'm gonna say gradual from one perspective and fast on the angle. So when I joined this church, I got involved, real heavily. At that point, that's where I divided, from my girlfriend at that time, which has now been over 25 years ago, because I was going more towards faith and she was going more towards, the way we were before. And so we ultimately, maybe a year, we broke up, and I was just really inundated in the word and church. And so to answer that question, that first year, I recall, I'll never forget this, that first year, I only missed one church service. And that church service was the following Sunday. And that was because I had already made plans before getting saved on this Sunday to be in Miami that following week. So when I went to Miami that following week, I came back and said, I'm not missing church at all, because I just wanted to know. I wanted to grow. I wanted to understand that word. So I was in morning service, and I was in evening service. I was in what we call the name of the church, university. And so I was really just growing, and maybe a year after that, I felt that God was calling me to preach. And I'm like, there's no way I can preach, because I stuttered. And what made me know I was called to preach or that desire was in me was because I had stuff to say, but I couldn't say it. So I want to say something, but it can never come out because I was a severe stutterer. I'm talking about to the degree that I would go to school with the headsets on, in therapy for 2 or 3 hours a day, trying to speak, and nothing helped me out. The big boxes I would carry and the big headsets, and it was David said I was that bad. So this here would not happen at all. But I had stuff I wanted to say, and just this went on for months. And to add to this here, once I broke up with her, I was always at the nursing home. I would go to the nursing home and do volunteer work like 5 days a week. I was still in school at the time. But every day after school or before school, I was in the nursing home at least 5 days a week, volunteering, going from room to room, just speaking to the residents, just spending time there, in the volunteer room, doing activities with them. And I remember when I stopped stuttering, one night I was praying. I said, God, if you're calling me to ministry, I don't want to just go out saying, Jesus loves you, it's going to be okay. But I want to go out in the same power that your disciples actually went out. And they went out in authority and ability to make a difference. And I remember when I prayed that prayer, and again, I remind you, I'm Southern Baptist. We don't believe in gifts. We don't believe in tongues. We don't believe in prophecy. We don't believe in, at least at that point, our pastor said God doesn't speak the way that many people say God speaks. So if it wasn't from the word, God didn't speak. And so at that point, I didn't care. Whatever he said, I believed. And so, as a matter of fact, he said to us, if I ever come to the pulpit saying God said, y'all better get rid of me. Oh, okay, cool. All I knew was what he taught us. And so again, mega church, 5,000 members. He has a huge influence. And I remember this night in my room praying, saying, God, if you're calling me into ministry, I do not want to go out telling people that, God loves them. It's going to be okay. But I want to go out in the same power of your disciples. And I tell you, man, that when I prayed that prayer, I was in my room. When I prayed that prayer, it was as if something punched me in my chest. And I began to speak in tongues for the first time. It scared me so much so I jumped up and I turned the lights on. And I began to just question what happened. Again, I'm from a background where we don't believe in this. We spoke against it. And I just began to, in that moment, in a matter of maybe 12 seconds, God explained to me or made it clear to me why that happened the way it happened. And he would not allow this to happen in church because I was indoctrinated that this doesn't exist. And if that would happen in church and someone would put their hands on me, or someone would have pushed me, or someone would have got in my ears, did whatever, all the things that I would have said, no, that was A, B, and C. But no one, even that preacher of 5,000 members, great influence in the Southern Baptist Church, have done some amazing things. And not even he could tell me that what I experienced, was not real. And so from, I would say about 5 months later is when I heard a man on TV preaching about Moses was a stutterer. I was shocked, like, what? Moses was a stutterer? I jumped up, found the verse. I blushed, like, wow, Moses was a stutterer. Went back to sleep. And I think a couple of days later, the next day, I found myself in a conversation with some friends at my house. There's maybe about 5 different people. And I started talking. I was talking with them. So I said, Corey, you're talking. Yeah, I'm talking. That same week, a few days later, I preached my first sermon in a nursing home, Eartha M. White nursing home. They brought all of the residents, as many as they could, into the entertainment room, about 5 times bigger than this room here. They brought all the residents in there. I preached my first sermon in that room from Philippians chapter 3, verse 1. Finally, my brethren, rejoice. So that's the long story of how I got to the point of being able to preach my first sermon, to speak, and felt that God wanted me to be in ministry.
Wow, man, that's incredible. Yeah. And you were on your way from there. That's really impressive. Well, you're in Savannah now,
yeah,
obviously. So take me through just a quick series of events of you're married.
Yeah.
I think you have a couple kids.
Yeah.
You have a couple kids, mm-hmm. and you have a church here. So what was the thing that brought you here and got you to that point of your family and your church?
So, of course, pastor of the church is what brought me here. Been a part of an organization called ARC, Association of Related Churches, now about 15 years now. When I felt the call to pastor, we planted a church for the first time in Jacksonville in January of 2004. When I left that church, I moved from a Southern Baptist church into a missionary Baptist church, and I was there for several years, got licensed and ordained, ultimately was sent out to pastor a church in Jacksonville, was there for several years, about 4 or 5 years, I think it was at this point, and didn't get the traction that I felt that was in me to establish. And being a part of an organization called ARC, who had a vision of planting life-giving churches, throughout the nation. As I was serving in that, at a certain point, I grew in that, was actually influential in coaching other pastors in churches, seeing them grow from 2 members to, in some cases, one particular church now, 5,000 to 7,000 members. I began to say, God, these churches are thriving and growing as a direct result of me coaching them and processing them. I'm not getting these same results and fruits. And one of the things that God said to me was, because of the way that we establish ourselves through our Baptist church, that we would not see the results that we wanted to receive based on the way that we were established. And a lot of that was with a lot of our old traditions and customs and processes and things like that. And he showed me clearly you never be able to, in this case, put new wine in old wineskins, old minds, old methods. And so ultimately we resolved that ministry. I think it was in May of 2010. And we prepared to launch a church here in Savannah in January 2014, which we did that. So my wife, we've been married now 18 years. Can't believe it feels like 2 years, but been married now 18 years. We are a blended family, 3 kids, my 2 kids from previous relationship, and then our daughter together, who's 16 years old, who's in the house, who's the last one in the house. Praise God, excited about her exit probably next year to head to college. We have a grandson as well. And so imagine that, 43 years old, have a grandson. He's here in Savannah.
Looking good, man.
Yeah, thank you. And so, so we're here, planted Hope City Church, formerly Impact Church, back in January 2014. Started, of course, with us. Matter of fact, this week is our church anniversary of 7 years of establishing Hope City Church, formerly Impact Church here in Savannah.
Yeah, I saw that. It's a really it's a big week, man.
Yeah,
and we'll get to that a little bit more towards the end of like how all this is kind of happening together. Just kind of a couple follow-up questions about your family though. What is it like being a dad with your kids and having that blended family and sharing your past experiences with your kids and kind of where the other kids came from, and like this is everybody being together and we are a family, and has that been pretty seamless, or how do you talk to your kids about kind of your previous life experiences, and are they at the age where you do that yet? Right.
Yeah, they're definitely, like I said, one's 24 and one's 22. For the past 6 years prior to them going to college and after getting married, they were living with us. So of course it was seamless as much could be seamless, but whenever you're blending a family, I tell people that there are some things a traditional pastor family could not teach to a congregation of people who come from untraditional family unit. It's just certain things they cannot explain. They don't know the dynamics of being in a blended family of, the mom, these aren't her birth kids, but it's the dad's birth kids, and the way you will speak to them with caution or the like thereof is different based on who's speaking. And so I would say our experience was, for the kids wise, they saw my wife as someone who loved them. I think out the gate that when you, particularly as Christians, show honor and love towards kids and vice versa, the kids towards that person, any schisms that not might come up, but that will come up. And when they come up, you can make it past those schisms. So we've had many times at the office that they were kids at the time. So being much older now, it just certain things we didn't experience that kids who are older, who could be mouthy and have things to say to another parent. We didn't have those things, but we did have the dynamics of the outside influence who wanted to give their voice on how we should do this and what we should do. And so there were moments of the schisms in between us as adults, more than it was with the kids. And yes, there was some there with the kids, but I think a lot of it came, with the angle of us as the adults. At that time, I don't know if you remember, is when pagers were the things. So it was at one point the
pagers and rollerblades. Yeah, man. All right.
At the first couple of years of our marriage was where the outside person only had access to a pager. You're not calling because again, my upbringing with her, she came from Miami, and not the best part of Miami, and so the hood, if you would. And so the way that I handle things, she did not handle things. I'm more diplomatic, and she wasn't diplomatic. And so I wasn't going to bring that into my house with my wife and with my kids, when they were with me. So I always tried my best to be the guardrail and protecting my house, my kids, my wife from any past experience, as much was in reason. There will always be moments, where there will have to be some type of encounter, whether it was a direct encounter with us and her, or from things the kids actually may bring to the house. such as, for example, the way they're used to doing things at home, they can't do over here. And we or she have to interject and say, no, this is how we do it over here. So, but at the end of the day, I think we did a pretty good job of actually blending it to the point that my kids, particularly my son, would refer to my wife as mom.
Okay.
Even today, he called her mom.
Yeah. And one of the things I was wondering too is like how you either currently or did navigate all those other family relationships that you had in Jacksonville and maybe in Miami too. And then you get older, you get away, and then you become a pastor.
Right.
And did that change your relationships with any of those family members who at the time when you left, a lot of them were in a really dangerous or dark place or a spot you didn't want to be, and now you're here? And was there any kind of
not really
relationship that changed? Or
no, the only thing is I think they all see me as the father. Even whether it's my mom who's still on drugs, whether it's aunts and uncles, they know I'm the nephew, but there's an honor there, almost as if he's the spiritual voice for our family wise. If anyone need advice or counseling or prayer, they'll reach out to me. So I think they saw and see what happened, and they actually honor it. And so for that, I respect them for as well.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right, man. So we're at an interesting week. We're filming this right now. It's MLK week.
Yeah.
It's
inauguration
week, and you're celebrating your 7th anniversary as now Hope City, which was changed from Impact, and I'm guessing that word has special meaning to you.
Yeah.
Hope.
Yeah.
After hearing your story, I can see how that probably means a lot to you.
Most definitely.
From where you're coming from. And man, it's a crazy world to navigate right now in our country. And as a pastor who has a blended family, has experienced all those things and grew up in that kind of environment. Yeah. And and being someone where I see you as like, you really do care about all people. Definitely. Like you are definitely a proud Black man, but like you care about people because you see them through God's eyes. Definitely. And you want to be someone that's giving hope and uniting people for what you believe in. Definitely. And like, how do you do that right now? Definitely. It's tough, and I'm sure there's expectations where it's like, hey, dude, you're a Black man, you get it, Corey. Yeah. But there's also part of you that is, but I also have to speak and fight for other people, even though it might go against some really strong things I believe personally. And how do you navigate what's going on right now with race and politics, and not necessarily your point of view on each thing, but just as a man, as a pastor, entering into this space?
Yeah. For me, and let me just say, authentically being me, I see myself as a proud man. The proud Black man hat does come on, but I want to say this particularly for anybody who's watching right now. I want to just explain what I mean by that. I see myself as a proud man. Unfortunately, because of history in our country, we have to put on the hat of saying I'm a proud Black man. Unfortunately, because you go to other countries, whether their skin is white or Black or brown, they're just African or they're just Asian, whatever it is. But because of the division and the segregation and the racism and the slavery in our country, we have to use that language of I'm a proud Black man or a proud Black woman. Unfortunately, that's a part of our culture and DNA as a nation where we have to do that. Now, if we go back hundreds of years ago and we were just regular Americans and citizens like everyone else, I don't think that would be a language. But because there was a point where Black men couldn't be proud, that their esteem was low, that they didn't know how to go home and tell their wife or their kids that they lost their job or that they were kicked off the job or that, just different, whatever demeaning things happened to them to make them not be proud in our nation, in our world. We now have to put those hats on and say, hey, I'm a proud Black man now. But at the end of the day, as a Christian, as a believer, I'm more walk around that I'm a proud man that has the ability to influence white men, Black men, white women, Black women. And I'm proud to be able to do that. And I say that from the angle of, as a Christian, Jesus says it's going to become a point where you're no longer male, no female, Jew nor Gentile. Unfortunately, in our nation, in our country, to some degree, in some pockets, we're not there yet where people can say, I'm free, where we're no longer Black or white. So unfortunately, that's still our DNA to some degree. I tend to lean more into the verse that we're no longer male nor female, or Jew nor Gentile, black or white. We're all one in Christ Jesus. I lead from that. I try to stand in that. I believe there's power in that. I believe that's what we have to get to, even if we're not there yet. But I tend to stand in the strength of that, because I believe at some point, if I want to, that when I'm finished, when I'm done with my assignment and my race, that I have something to hand over to my kids and future generations. I wanted to be able to say that I did my part to push the ball down the road where we don't have to say certain things. Now, will we ever get there? I don't even know. But I do believe, I'm confident to know that we are way better than we've ever been before as a nation and a country. Do we have issues? Absolutely we do. But are we at a place where 70 years ago, I would have been able to say and do certain things? No. So we're further off and further better. I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for the fact that in the midst of the division that we have in our nation, in our country right now, that people can say what they want to say. We all can voice our opinion. We all can speak our truth. And for the most part, not be killed for it. For the most part, not be bashed for it. Now, we know on social media, if you give your opinion, then you are ostracized, you're this. But for the most part, people can say what they want to say and move on and live their life. Social media don't count right now. That's a world by itself. You can't control that. But at the end of the day, we all can get out and march and speak our truth and fight for this and fight for that. So I'm pleased for that. But I believe I have a responsibility that's greater than me, that's greater than my kids, that's greater than my race, that's greater than your race. That's how can I leave my community, this nation, this world better because Corey was here. And that's my focus. Not Black Corey, not even Christian Corey. Though my Christian faith is who I am, but it's just that guy Corey. What did he do while he was here, even for people that didn't look like him, think like him, or act like him? We're no longer male, female, Jew, or Gentile. How will people remember me that way? And it's a reason why the Bible tells us that even sinners loved hanging around Jesus. It's a reason why, And
well, you said speech was important for you, obviously, because you had a hard time doing it. Then you were called to share certain things. Like I had things I wanted to share. You're a preacher. And, do you feel pressure, given your position and who you are and what you do, from other people to say certain things, whether it's just personally or from the pulpit, and because of things that are going on? Is that a thing you feel, or you just have to block it off and say, like, listen, whatever God wants me to say, I'm going to say it, but I can't like tippy toe around everybody. And I imagine that'd be really difficult.
Yeah, I always feel it, but I have no problem not giving into it. I always feel like it's a burden and responsibility for me to speak toward certain things. But I also believe that I don't have a right. I don't even have an obligation to have to speak to everything. 'Cause I believe that when you speak about everything, you lose your voice and your value. If you're just talking about and putting your 2 cents on every single thing. I do believe that I have a voice and a value in my voice. I don't believe that I stopped stuttering just to preach to 2 people, 500 people, 1,000 people. I believe that my stutter went away for me to be a voice of change in our world, in our society. And I don't want to waste that voice by always having to have something to say, particularly on social media, because folk can take one statement that you make and turn it into something you did not even mean wise. And I've obviously, have had that happen to me before. But at the end of the day, I want to add value. I don't want to instigate. I want to convert. And there's many people that when they say things, they say it to instigate issues and more problems. If I ever say anything that is controversial, it's not to instigate an argument or a fight. It's because you still got to speak truth, period wise. Truth has to be spoken, but I speak truth for the purpose of maybe to shed light, to convert, to start a healthy dialogue. But there are some people who like to interject things just for the purpose of starting fires, to start division, to start a debate. And I'll pull out of those real fast. And I'll tell people quickly, even on my page, hey, don't bring that here. I'll delete it so fast. because that's not my motivation. It's to educate, it's to enlighten, and I will speak truth. I don't even hard truth. I've spoken hard truth on abortion. I'm speaking hard truth on race relations. I'm speaking hard truth when it comes to people who use their pulpits. I'm just speaking honest that I believe the church, if we haven't learned anything in this season here, that particularly to have churches that are white and black members, that are Democrats and Republicans, or like myself, an independent. When you have a church that's supposed to be for our people, and you are narrowing down Jesus' influence to a particular party, all you're doing is actually hindering the gospel's effectiveness to change our culture and our society, because now you're forcing Jesus to be left or right, to be the donkey or the elephant. But Jesus was always aggressively in the middle. He never took sides. They always tried to get him to take sides. But Jesus did not just love Jerusalem. Jesus did not just love America. Jesus did not just love the Jews. God so loved the world. And when we try to narrow God down to, or Jesus down to a particular party, a particular a denomination, which Jesus was not even for denominations. All that was man-made stuff because we couldn't agree, because we couldn't get along. So we create these different parties, different groups. And so we get to a place where we divide the people that we're called to win and to save. So for me, I don't see Republicans and Democrats. I see lost and found. So when I minister in my pulpit, I'm looking at lost and found people, not Republicans and not Democrats. And if I ever say anything bent towards Democrat and Republicans or a political, it's not to side, it's to help us all see that, hey, you know what? Neither side has it all together. Neither side is all right. Because I can show you a lot of red scriptures and I can show you a lot of blue scriptures. And it'll confuse us all. Well, who's Jesus with? Well, who's God with? And we'll never be able to box him in on with our Western culture, political system-wise, no matter how skillful we try to do it. We can't, and we shouldn't.
Yep. I don't know how to ask this question, exactly how to ask it, but just from your perspective, from seeing, white pastors or predominantly white churches and their response, either publicly or privately, to racial things that go on in our country,
right.
Is it encouraging, discouraging, kind of a false sense that they care, or like, what are you seeing? I mean, I've got opinions about it that I struggle with. And what I see or I think should happen. I'm just wondering from your perspective, and again, you don't have to give me personal examples of people or churches or anything, but just overall, is it encouraging right now, or is it like just kind of wait and see, or discouraging?
At one point it was encouraging. And to answer the first part, pastors who are speaking up and not speaking up, I'm not against those who speak up or don't speak up. I tend to have a problem with people who speak about something at one point, but don't speak about it on the next point. Like, for example, I'll give an example, and hopefully this gets us back to your original question. At a certain point, a lot of people use prophecy to say that God said that this particular person will be our president. And they spoke about that very loudly to hundreds and thousands of people. But when it turned out to be the opposite, those same voices were silent. I don't have a problem with people who never spoke about that staying silent. I have a problem with people who spoke about that so loud that when now the moment requires and demands that you come back and address what you loudly spoke about, now you're silent. That's dangerous. It's dangerous. It's confusing. It's an affront to the integrity of the Christian faith. And watch this here, not just the integrity of the Christian faith for today, but for future generations. So when we fail to go, see, politicians may double down on certain things, on things that's not true. But as Christians, when we find out that things aren't true, we don't double down. We go back and either repent, or we go back and course correct and say, hey, you know what? I didn't see that at first. Now I see. But what we are doing now is we're doubling down on a lie, on something that wasn't accurate, that wasn't the way that we thought it was. And that's dangerous. And you may win in the moment, but we're losing ground over time. I told one pastor who reached out to me, I said, it's not about saving your face, it's about saving his face. And the reason why some people don't come out and speak about racial things or and who really care. And some of them, and some guys really do care. And in some cases, it's not a matter of if, either or, it's both and. It's just some of them don't know how to. So it's guys, I get calls all the time, private guys, Corey, well, what should I do? I don't know how to say A, B, and C. So in many cases, it's not even guys don't want to. They don't know how to, or then you get people that when they finally do say something, instead of being people who want to convert, they agitate what they said or they manipulate what they said, and it's like, hey, that's not what he meant. He or she is not fully abreast as you are. Give some space to learn and to grow, but we're fighting and we're arguing and we're bickering, and it forces people to say, you know what? I ain't gonna say nothing. I'd rather go back into my hole. And so I think it's both. It's some that want to speak up, but they feel like they can't. And it's guys who won't speak up because, and unfortunately, in some congregations, I had one pastor, a large pastor, just spoke with a couple of days ago. He had no clue, and he publicly apologized for this here in his own city, Oklahoma, that a group of KKKs were sending out information to recruit people to be a part of the KKK. And it's a white influential pastor in his own city wise, and he could not believe it himself. Huge voice, and he publicly had to step out and talk about that. So it's so much to talk about, and you sometimes feel like I'm darned if I do, I'm darned if I don't. But I will, if you ask me what should we do, I think we all got to be able to put on the line, though. I think every pastor has to say something in whatever their influence is, whatever their wear is. Jesus did not run from the issues of the day. And what we're trying to do now is run away from the issues of today. And I believe the issues of today can be the things that bring revival to our nation. But we're trying to, let's just let it die off and move on, and then we'll be back to normal. But we're not. We're not. The divide of the races in the church, and I speak this in the prophetic sense here, the divide of the divide of the races in the churches is going to get deeper if we don't talk about it. And it's sad, unfortunately. It's sad. And the sad thing is, if we would have had these talks years ago, we wouldn't be here today.
Yeah. And I guess that's my biggest struggle with it, is ultimately a lot of things just feel like a show, even though they might not be. And people say, to me, it's like, well, how do you have it's this kind of stuff right here. Yeah. Is that if you are already invested in, I'm around people that don't look like me, or people that are dealing with the race much differently than me, and that's just part of my life and my natural culture for me and my family, then it's not as hard really to speak about something. Right. Well, I don't have to do it in a mean, divisive way, but I can say, hey, here's what's going on, and some people are hurting, and we should do something or pray for it. But if that's part of it, then you can't say something. Right. But if you're not part of that, and then big things come up, then you're always caught from behind. It's like, well, I care, but what do I do? Well, it's because you're not involved in it. Right.
And I also think what we fail to realize in America, that we do have a lot of states, and that Georgia is not like Florida. Or Jacksonville is not like Miami, or Georgia is not like Oklahoma. It's so many different states, and the experiences is different. I mean, like here in Georgia, I've been here now 7 years. I've never, and this is my truth and my story, I've never experienced any iota of racism my entire time here. Unfortunately, up until the past year. Now, as a black man in America, in Georgia, I've heard stories of people who have, but that was not my story. And because that was your story, I'm not going to say I've had that same experience, because I also learned from people, not just with racial issues, but in general wise, people have the tendency to unconsciously take people's stories as if their own experience. And so I'm saying that to make a point here is that was not my experience wise. But when I experienced what I experienced over the past few months, the past 8 months here in Savannah, nobody can tell me what I experienced when it came to the racial issues that I experienced for the past 8 months. Because as one who's been here for 7 years, and I can boldly say, I've never had an issue with white people, and I'm around them a lot. I've never had that issue. No one can tell me it's a night and day difference of the 8 months I experienced versus the six and a half years. And so my bigger point is, is everyone experience is different wise, and those people who have not experienced racial conflict or issues wise, I think it's naive of them to think that America, our nation, has totally pushed away the racial issues. It's just, like I said, I haven't had anyone pull me over in a cop pull me over and made me feel a certain way. That's not my experience. Mm-hmm. But I know some people that is their experience wise. And so therefore, when we honor another person's experience and respect that and learn from it, I think it gets us down a road of, okay, how can we fix this? And let's be clear. I don't think none of us is expecting this to be 100% resolved. Racism is going to always exist in our country like any sin. It's a sin. My issue with racism in America would not be that it's a sin. It's that if we have systems and structures in place that affirms one race over another race is more powerful, or empowers another group of people because of their skin color or because of their wealth and things like that. Those systematic issues I would have an issue with. But so far as sin, we're going to always have racism is a sin. But then we can't, what my white brothers have done is they always resorted to sin in a sense of putting it with the rest of the sins. And rightfully so in the right context. But because we are in a nation unlike many other nations where slavery and segregation was not a law. So when something was a law at one point, even when that law has changed, you may have changed the law in that nation, but that doesn't change the hearts and the mindsets of people that wants to keep certain things alive. That's good or bad, And so unfortunately, that heart is still in place. And in some states in our nations, though the system is not A, B, and C, the men and women who are running those systems are still that way. And they're trying to enforce systems that should not be in place, and those have to be dealt with.
Gotcha. Thanks, man. I just got two quick questions for you before we end the podcast, and one of them is your Hope City now. Your church is Hope City.
Yeah.
and just what is your hope as the pastor for the church and for what you want to be and do in the city, especially during this time that's so difficult for many people? Like, what is that hope for you right now moving forward?
Yeah, so when we changed the name of the church back in September from Impact Church to Hope City Church, of course, it was tied to our bigger vision of making a difference around the entire city of Savannah. Our 4 core values, our visions of our church is to help people know God, find freedom, discover purpose so that they can make a difference. Simple as that. And as we do that by helping people find hope, whether it's hope in ministry, hope in humanity, because unfortunately, the level of hope in mankind to some degree is being diminished. I mean, I'm just being frank with you. Guys that look like you and look like me, I've had more relationships with people that don't look like me for the past 10 years, in ministry wise and working with wise. You almost feel like, man, we were doing great and we allowed something to come in here and just diminish what we have built and what we have established. And now everybody's running to their own the silos and their own circles. And it's like, man, how can you fix this, Corey? And my mind always goes back to our hope is in Jesus. And what is this hope that we can find in Jesus? Not just the salvation of our us going to heaven, but our salvation and delivering us from all the ills and the schisms and the problems that we have in our nation, our country, our world, and our society. So for me, that's the bigger picture. I'm going to narrow it down to Savannah right now. Yes, it's to win souls. Yes, it's to build a church for God. Yes, it's to feed a lot of homeless people. Yes, it's to see people get off the streets in the simplest term. But the bigger view, just punching the devil in the freaking face, seeing things, not racism, but things like racism annihilated from across our entire world. Again, as a sin, it will always exist, but just annihilated across the whole system-wise. just respecting and honoring people, men treating their wives right, children honoring their parents. Because we go back, the family structure, if there's going to be any hope for our world, there's going to be restoring the family unit and structure and value of the family. And we got to get in our circles, if you would, our little small homes, you with your family, you with your sphere of influence, having hard conversations, you doing hard truths like this right here. I'm hoping, once we're done, your audience, will see this here, and somebody who don't currently think like me will probably say, I can take that part of what he said, and now I can take this here and go share it with my little circle. So my hope is my little light can make a difference in a real big way, even if it starts off in little conversations like this here, and other people take them and it just spreads and make a difference.
Yep, and that's the perfect segue to our last question, which is always, what can somebody do? Yeah. And you bring it back to the family, or bringing it to making a difference. And for someone who's watching or listening to this, and either they have that experience that you had in some way as a younger kid, and going through that kind of life with that kind of family and that kind of environment, and is really struggling, or they just know somebody who is, or eventually see it, like, what can somebody do right now that's just a simple, tangible thing that can make a big difference? You might not think it does, but it really could, because I've been through it.
Empathy. Show empathy. Listen. Zip your lips. Just, and I'm not speaking to a race. I'm just speaking to humanity, people. I'm not even referring to a specific issue. Empathy. Empathize with your neighbor. Empathize with the homeless man down the street, because that could be you. Empathize with the person who just lost their job, because that could be you. We need to be more empathetic. It's a lot of sympathy going on. We got to, everybody, sympathy says, I feel sorry for you. Empathy says, I feel sorry for you. What can I do to help? Yeah. And so we're in a very sympathetic world. I sympathize with you, but empathy says, man, I empathize with that.
Yeah, that's really good, because that's one of my favorite quotes, and one we've said on here too, is that empathy also requires proximity. You can do sympathy from a distance. You can do sympathy from your phone, watch a video, get moved in a sermon, and just be like, oh, it's great, cool. You should care for somebody. Yeah. And then the next day comes, but until that proximity, you're in that person's space, you're listening to their story, you're feeling their pain, or like you said, you just zip it and you listen. Yeah. That requires a closer proximity. Yeah. And being uncomfortable. Yeah. And I think that's a great word, and that's not easy to do for everybody. But if you're not doing those things, I think that tells you a lot about where your mindset is, and whether you're just in that little bunker, like you were talking about, just personally as a family or as a religion or as a political party, you're sheltering yourself from really empathizing.
The scripture, I think over in Romans 12, it says, be not conformed to this world, but be you transformed by the anakinesis, the renewing of your mind. And again, in our world here in America, we be not conformed to this world. And the scripture wasn't referring to this cosmos. It was referring to this ion, the patterns of this world wise. And as your audience listening to this, particularly as believers and Christians, be not conformed to this ion, this world. The question now is, I have been patterned after this in many parts of my life. What do I need to go back and reconform myself, or reshape, or do a anakinesis, a renewing? Because you know what? I was raised this way. I thought this way. It is what it is. Most Black people are Democrats because that's what they grew up in. That's what we grew up in. Many of my white brothers are Republicans, or Black or white. My point is, if you was raised in a Democratic home or Republican home, you tend to take on that form. And so in that same thought, if you have adopted some things that is not healthy and proper, in order to be transformed, you have to be willing to have an anakinesis of your nous, of your mind, so that you can prove what is that good, acceptable, and perfect will of God. And as Christians, as believers, we are obligated to have a renovation of our mind from what our world, even our American culture world, has told us, particularly when we line it up with, okay, now God's kingdom, not the empire of our world, but the kingdom of God's world. How does my mind line up with the mind of the kingdom? And so
that's a good challenge. That's a good challenge, and that's a good word, good podcast, good interview, good blood brother now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah,
I think we made it.
Yeah, I think so.
I want to appreciate you for just being here, man.
Thank
you for taking the time to do it. And yeah, it was really meaningful for you to kind of share your story and your perspective and that challenge at the end to empathize. So I really dig it, man. So thanks for being here, Quinn. Thanks for producing. And yeah, we're at For the Neglected, and we'll catch you next time. Thank you, Corey Williams. Later, everyone. Peace.